Aaron Beatty. Lucinda Chodan's journey has taken her from the small town of Westlock, Alberta, to various cities across our country where she's built an incredible resume as both a journalist and an editor. She's now editor-in-chief of the Montreal Gazette and senior vice president of editorial at Post Media, making her the most senior woman in Canada's newspaper industry. Lucinda, thank you very much for being with us today. What an incredible resume you have. And after 35 years in the industry, you must have seen an enormous amount of change during that time. How has the newspaper environment changed for women over the course of your 35 years as a manager?
Well, it's a lot better than it was when I started. I could remember times when it was very difficult to be a female journalist. It was very hard to get taken seriously, and most of us worked in the lifestyles department, which the men in the newsroom often dismissively called recipes and diseases. So, really to be taken seriously as a reporter and then as a manager was quite hard for women back in that time, which was, the late 1980s. Very happy to say that that has changed. I have senior management teams who are predominantly female, and that's only arrived at not through any sort of particular affirmative action, but by the fact that the playing field has been leveled for women in our industry, and that has allowed the great people to rise to the top, whatever gender they are.
That's encouraging. This is a very rough and tumble environment in journalism often. I'm struck by the fact that it's not that long ago that I can remember when we first started hearing on radio women as announcers and as anchors. Today we take it in stride, but there was a question in those days as to whether or not there was sufficient gravitas in having a woman there. It's astonishing how much effort it takes to break down this sort of a stereotype.
It is amazing, and I remember those discussions. I also had a very big mentor of mine, a male mentor, whose nickname for me was Bubbles. And he tried to persuade me not to use the byline Lucinda, but to use the word Cindy instead of, because it sounded more approachable and less sort of serious. I really don't know what allowed me to stick to my guns as a super junior person at that point, but I'm glad I did.
Good for you for doing it. It's the equivalent of people in television where women find that people are commenting about their hair or their dress as opposed to the quality of the journalism. And they still suffer from that today.
Yes.
Um, let's talk about your organization. Do you feel that the organization is committed to actually building a more diverse and inclusive workplace? We often hear about organizations say, yes, we believe in this, we're going to be different. I was defense minister many years ago. It is stunning today to see how little progress has been made in terms of diversity and inclusion and having a safe environment for women in the military.
It's we've been working concertedly at that, and part of that is having women at the table making decisions. But I would say that from everything, starting with more flexible sort of attitudes towards parenting. A lot of women didn't get a chance to be a manager in the past because they couldn't work the hours and they couldn't stay through supper time because it was time for them to go home and cook a meal. That was the perception. Certainly women are more included at every level of the organization. I'd also like to believe, and I do believe, that in addition to being a more inclusive place for women, we've been making strides in making our workplace more inclusive of what really exists in the general Canadian population. That is a more diverse workforce, people with disabilities, people of color, racialized individuals. We have a national Diversity and Inclusion Council at Post Media that started last summer in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement. We are meeting, surveying our workforce, and we'll be making concrete recommendations around how to diversify, not just say we believe in diversity.
Lucinda, obviously there's a question of equity and fairness and ensuring that everybody has an opportunity to contribute and to get ahead. And this is an issue, obviously, for businesses of all kinds that comes up regularly. But I think an argument can also be made that you have a better product as a result. That if you are not truly representative of the population on the other side of your customer base or your reader base, that you can't do as good a job. Have you seen a change in terms of the product itself as a result of the focus on diversity and inclusion?
Absolutely. We recently produced a national section on Aboriginal Peoples Day, a national celebration of our First Nations on June 21st. All of the people who wrote for that section, all of the photographers were First Nations and Indigenous peoples, and it absolutely affected the content. And a couple of times they said, hey, that's tokenistic, or we would never approach things that way. So I think that really the ability to reflect what people are living and who they are makes every product a better product.
You were talking about the challenges before for women to participate fully as journalists in the past, the impediments that are put in the way. And you were mentioning, for example, that today there's better respect for the role of families. Do you feel that today that you've conquered the hurdles and that women are able to participate fully in the activities that are expected of a contemporary journalist?
Well, some people call it the glass cliff as opposed to the glass ceiling, which is that very, very senior levels. Women are invited in sometimes when the job is considered a very difficult job. But in addition to that kind of challenge, I would say that one area in which women are at a disadvantage is on social media. Twitter, in particular, is a vile and dangerous place for female journalists. People have been threatened with all kinds of ugly things, called names. It's very difficult to believe, if you haven't seen it, the awful misogyny and hatred that exists there, directed particularly at women and sometimes racialized people. And I think that for us to really grow as a society, we have to find a way to address that hateful kind of atmosphere, because I don't think it is a safe place for women.
So even in 2021, with all of the effort that's being made to try to diversify and open up and to change old attitudes, there are still very serious impediments that are put in the way of women being able to participate in exactly the same way as a man can.
Absolutely. And it's not just the journalism world in which you find that. You've probably heard about Gamergate and how women in the gaming industry have absolutely been vilified, confronted with terrible, terrible sexist things. The movie industry, there's a reckoning across industries around the treatment of women. And I'm hopeful that things will continue to change, but there's a long way to go.
We've seen examples in TV journalism of people just saying horrendously abusive things to women who are reporters who are on air at the time. And it's stunning to think that in our society today, people would think this was smart or somehow funny.
You know, I'm not sure what gives people permission to, or think they have permission to behave in that way. And certainly, Twitter honestly feels like it's people by a pack of a lynch mob of people who are out to wheel upon one person and then attack another person. Again, when minorities are involved, racialized individuals and women, I think that's a highly unsafe place for people. I have great respect for people females who can weather that, but I never ask young female reporters, for instance, I don't tell them that I expect them to tweet as a mandatory part of their job, because I do think it's difficult.
Final question on a very different subject. One of the major challenges for the 2020s is finding managers. What's your experience in the newspaper industry, and how is this evolving?
I think newspaper industry, as other industries, is looking at the part of the demographic bulge where the baby boomers have been hanging on to their jobs for a long time. There's a level of managers who haven't really had a chance to grow because the huge demographic weight is with the baby boomers. So then there are people who are just entering the workforce. I think there will be a great lack of managers starting now and going into the next sort of decade. That's a huge opportunity for women because there will be opportunities. They will be invited, as others are, to step through the door, and I encourage them to do so. Being a manager is an incredibly creative and rewarding role. It's not the kind of thing that some of us started out thinking that we wanted to do, but imagination, creativity, and the ability to create a better workplace all lie ahead for people who take up the challenge.
Lucinda, thank you. Thank you for being with us. You've been a trailblazer throughout your career. Thank you for the work that you've done in knocking down obstacles. And thank you for sharing your insights with us today.
Thank you so much, Perrin, for inviting me.